y'all, welcome and welcome back. Today I am back to read more of your own terrifying stories to you today, so let's get into it. Before we get into it though, if you have any stories you would like for me to share, please send them to the email below in the description. And also, I started a Patreon, so if you are interested in that, please check it out. I'll have more information on it below, and if you go on there, it'll show you the different tiers. We do a lot of fun stuff over there, so check that out. But now that we got that out of the way, let's start reading these scary stories. The first story happened around a month or two ago. My family and I absolutely adore the outdoors and go camping quite often. We went camping deep in the wilderness of the Rocky Mountains in the Idaho-Montana region. My parents were exploring the surrounding area while I was reading by myself at the campground. Well, all of a sudden, a weird feeling of dread or anxiety hits me out of nowhere. It feels like the air around me dropped 15 degrees. It was super cold. I still remember vividly the goosebumps on my skin to this day. The birds and bugs started to quiet down, and only the sound of a pine squirrel, who usually chirped when a predator was around, could be heard. I look up from my book, and I swear I see some large grayish thing dart behind a tree just yards away from me on the hill across the river where we were. A waft of what smelled like mold and a similar scent to sulfur blew through the breeze above. I did what I knew to do and acted like nothing happened, just ignoring it and casually walking to the car. I kept my eyes on the door and hopped inside, rummaging around our snack bag to seem like I was doing something I intended to do and not act freaked out. Thankfully, everything went back to normal in about a minute. My mom and dad came back, not really noticing anything had been amiss. I've been camping since then, and nothing weird has happened, fortunately. The second story is a bit shorter. A few months ago in the wintertime, I was sitting in my house alone after my parents had just left for work. I was waiting for my friend to pick me up for school, and I heard the loudest footsteps as clear as day above me. I live in a one-story house with nothing but a crawl space of an attic above. A quick backstory of the house. First of all, it's 116 years old, and second of all, an estranged lady who owned the home before us had a monkey that lived with her. The monkey had ate lead paint and passed away. My family and I always say when a light flickers or a mysterious creak in the house, it's just the monkey. I don't know if anyone else passed in our house, but those footsteps were so loud and heavy. It sounded like a grown man was just casually walking on my roof or something. Definitely spooked me quite a bit. As soon as my friend arrived, I ran out the door. That's so sad about the monkey! Maybe something did happen in that house. I don't know. For it to be that heavy of footsteps, I feel like it wouldn't have been the monkey, right? But as far as the story in the woods goes, that is horrific. It sounds like you may have seen a walker. Alright, second story. I come from a smallish town in Indiana, and this takes place back when I lived with my biological father. My older sister has always believed I've been sensitive to the paranormal. The story I would like to tell takes place over 3 months, and they all take place between 12 and 3 in the morning. A little backstory. The house my dad lived in was really old, and my room had the attic door in it. So for a start, I'm 12 years old and I was in 5th grade at the time. My sister wasn't home, she was at her boyfriend's home. I wake up to this girl who looks my age standing at the attic door. Right across from my room is my sister's room, and she's just looking at it. I ask, "Who are you?" She looked at me and asked where she was, saying my sister's name. I tell her she isn't home and why she wants my sister. She comes to the end of my bed and says she's her sister, and when I tell her she's not, she gets mad and runs into the attic. We've had issues with that attic the whole time we've lived in it. It would randomly fall or even fly open even if we nailed it shut. The next day when my sister got home, I told her about it and she freaked out. Later that night, we were all in the living room. It's me, my sister, and our stepsister, and all of us got this weird feeling. We look up the stairs. They were the stairs that make the sharp turn, so you couldn't see the top from the bottom of the stairs. But when we look, we all see this black shadow standing there. We've seen it a couple of times, but it's never come all the way down. A couple of nights later, we're all back in the living room, but we had our brother and his friend with us. It's 3 a.m., we're watching TV, and we hear this loud bang in the kitchen. Since I was the closest, I had to go look, and I was thinking it was just our cats getting into stuff. It was all of the knives that had fallen and all of our bowls on the floor. That's when we knew who it was. The last part I would like to mention is the last time I saw the little girl. It was 2 in the morning, and I was asleep on the couch. I never sleep on the couch, but I did this night, and I woke up for a split second to see her run from the kitchen to my stepmother's room. I didn't think anything of it, and I fell back asleep. So then I'm woken up by my stepmom saying, "This dog is going crazy. I think she's in the room." I went to look, and by the time I got there, she was gone. I never saw her again, but weird things kept happening. That's so creepy for her to be like, "That's my sister." It's like, what's going on here? Alright, next story. I recently found your channel due to searching up Wendy Boy stories on YouTube. I think one is hunting me or something similar. It started 2 years ago in my old home. I moved to a new home, but in that same town last year. I live in a very suburban area of California, which has never seemed very old or creepy. Things like this don't really happen around here. It was 2 years ago and honestly started earlier. I've always been an imaginative kid, according to my parents. I used to be constantly telling them about seeing figures in our old home we used to live in, saying things about shadow figures and creatures in my room or my parents' room. This room was where the previous owners had passed away in her sleep. This is where the previous owner had passed away in her sleep. But I only ever saw these figures when the attic would be open, which was often due to a bug infestation up there. I never paid much mind to these figures because they never really affected me or did anything. They just observed me and my family. Sometimes even doing normal daily things with us, like sitting in an empty chair while we ate or sitting on the couch when we watched TV. They seemed normal until a month after we started moving and cleaning the house. The figures seemed more agitated and clingy around me and anyone who was a friend of mine. My next door neighbor, who was also my age, would tell me about feeling nauseous and anxious when she was in my room near the attic. When we moved to the new house, the figures stopped appearing. I assumed they didn't follow and stayed at my old house, but I was wrong. The first week of my new home, me and a group of friends found out that there was a trail that led to the forest in the canyon. Of course, it's California, so it's not very spooky for us, but it's definitely off-putting in certain areas, especially an old tree that has fallen over and created an arch over the river that me and my friends would walk through. I started seeing the shadow figures again, but never in my home. Instead, it was always at the arch of the tree. Around the 5th time going down the river it had started, me and my friends had gone around sunset like idiots. I felt like we were being watched, but brushed it off as paranoia of the dark. We reached the river and my friends walked ahead and past the arch. I had stopped to tie my shoe. The river wasn't very full and the wind wasn't very strong, so the river was pretty quiet. When everything suddenly goes silent. I wasn't extremely worried, having thought it was just the silence of the night and the dry river. I stood up after tying my shoe and looked ahead for my friends. I didn't hear or see them, and I didn't have a flashlight because my other friend did, so like an idiot, I called out for her in the dark, silent night. I heard them call back, or thought it was them. I walked past the arch towards that noise, but I kept hearing it get farther away, and it sounded a bit odd. I realized something wasn't right, so I pulled my phone out and called my friends. Quickly, I found them again after calling them and clung to one of them, telling them that we should go home. We had started walking back, but we heard something scream, so we freaked and ran. Again, idiot move. We got back to my house and brushed it off, but that wasn't the end. The next day after they left, I'd gone downstairs to eat lunch, my mother downstairs looking a bit frightened. I asked what's wrong, and she told me she had a dream the other night about me being followed by some demonic monster. My mother was extremely religious and very sensitive, so I passed it off as her being her. That was until I got a text from my 3 different friends, all different times, and no group chats, each one of them saying something along the lines of feeling sick, seeing something demonic, having a sense of anxiety for their own and my safety. I pass it off, but the next couple of nights are restless and hard to sleep for me. One of the nights I had woken up at around midnight. I thought I heard a car pulling into the driveway, so I opened my window, assuming it was my mom who was working late that night. I was met with a sight I wish I never saw. My room is in the middle of 3 at the front of the house on the 2nd story, looking straight onto the road. Looking straight onto the road, the middle of the night, and standing in the middle of the road was what reminded me of a Wendy boy. Tall, way too tall, deer skull and antlers on its head. Dark blue, almost black fur and skin, hoofed feet, claw-like arms, and black, sunken eyes. I almost screamed, shutting my window and getting under my blankets, shaking with fear. I curled into a ball and hid under my blankets, peeking out when I once again thought I heard my mother, to which I was met with the sight of an oh-so-familiar shadow figure. Looking right at me, it had a distorted voice, and it said, "Go back to sleep." I screwed my eyes shut and hid under my blanket, doing as it asked. Well, I didn't really sleep, but played possum. The next morning I told my dad about it, but phrased it like having a nightmare. My father was very unbelieving of the supernatural. This was a year ago, and things like this continue. Shadow figures, mimicking voices, sights of the deer-like beast outside my window, or near the river when me and my friends go there. I don't know what to do or how to get rid of it on my own because I know my parents will be of no help. What's your advice? So here's what I would do. You said that you were seeing it outside of a window, right? So I would line those windows at the very top with black salt. You can buy it some places, you can make it. I make mine with like powdery charcoal, eggshell, regular salt, and rosemary. You can look up different ways to make it, but line the tops of your windows. A lot of people swear by iron, like putting iron stakes outside on the property. I don't know if you can do that because, you know, like you said, your parents, but definitely do black salt. I wouldn't go back in those woods. I know you said you and your friends really like it. I wouldn't, and I would ignore everything. You see something, you hear something, pretend you didn't. If you want to like keep a log of it, what I've done is I keep a notebook with me, and when I am away from where I've like seen sightings, I write it down. I don't even say it out loud, and I wait for activity to really stop before I talk about it. But that would be my advice. Let's read the next story. My mom told me that I was around the ages of 2 and 3 when I used to talk about someone named Ralph and his wife. My parents said they had no idea who Ralph was, but that I always talked about this guy. One day, I said something strange. I guess I said something about Ralph passed because he smoked too many cigarettes. And I pointed to the living room closet that always smelled like smoke no matter what we did. The smell did not leave. My mom decided to look deeper into the history of the home, and it turns out that Ralph was the builder of the house. He passed of having a lung condition at some point before my parents even owned the house. When I was around 10, Ralph's grandkids came to see if he still lived there at some point, but we had to explain that he had passed. The house was built in the 1950s to 60s, but people living on the land go further back to the 1800s. At some point, someone lived in a part of the woods in our backyard, but we're assuming that whatever was back there burned down at some point since we found pieces of houses. There's even a part of foundation of a really old house, as well as a door hinge. This would also explain another one of the spirits I've seen that I believe his name is Charlie. I've seen him in the mirror and he doesn't have a face. It looks like it was melted off. There's also a shadow figure in the home that we see often. It never does anything, but it comes in the form of a man, a dog, and some other things. There was also this girl that my parents saw before I was born. She had black hair and a white dress. She looked at least 8 or 9, and they said when I was 10 I had an encounter with her. It started off by me just seeing her at the edge of the woods, and then one day I saw her at the corner of the neighbor's garage. At that point, I got a good look at her. She looked to be around 7 feet tall. There's been other weird things, like a chair being thrown across the room, me having the feeling like I was being choked, only to find handprints on my neck, and things going missing and appearing in strange places. That was scary. The 7 foot tall little girl, goodbye. That sounds like the scariest Spirit Halloween animatronic. I can't. All right, let's read one more story. So this person sent in a few different stories, so it's gonna be a long one. Number 1, my grandpa, who is a very religious, God-fearing man, is a truck driver and has been for many years. Needless to say, he's seen some things. This happened a few years back. We had a family member who had struggled with substance abuse most of her life. It had gotten to the point where we would only help when it was absolutely necessary and absolutely possible. None of us had seen her in a bit, and one night on his way back home from work, my grandpa was driving through a downtown area, which is known to have a lot of riffraff. So when my grandpa saw the family member in question, he kept on driving, angry that she would still partake in that lifestyle after she'd been offered help time and time again. He says to this day, he regrets driving past. He's also alluded to the fact that he doesn't really know why he drove past, like he couldn't stop. He said she was dressed in all white, smiling and waving. The next day, they found out she had passed due to an overdose. One that perhaps was not intentional. The time of death was before the time that my grandpa saw her, and she wasn't wearing white. This story sticks out to me for 2 reasons. 1, my grandpa's the kind of religious that doesn't talk about ghosts or spirits. It's very taboo. They believe that as soon as someone dies, they're in heaven or hell, and anything outside of that is demonic. He doesn't think that. He knows who he saw. And 2, it gives me comfort knowing that she found peace in death, as morbid as that sounds. She had suffered her entire life, which led her to self-medicate with drugs. I'm glad to know she's no longer in pain. Story number 2. This story is one I'd forgotten about until a few days ago. I don't know how to start it. I only remember what happened, not exactly why. Quite a few summers ago, me, my brother, and my cousin were outside on our trampoline. Someone, I forgot who, had said something about a rain chant. I think it was my cousin. Not sure how we got to the topic, but rain chant made its way into the discussion. And by rain chant, I meant invoking precipitation through chanting. I grew up extremely religious, almost culty, so anything to do with ghost spirits and especially witchcraft was not only discouraged, but forbidden. I would never start a chant of any kind, as I saw it as taboo. I still wouldn't, but that's besides the point. All of a sudden, however, I started rhyming this chant. I came up with it in my head, and I started saying it over and over as a joke. My cousin and brother joined, and I forgot exactly what it was, but it was something along the lines of, "We want rain," or "We call upon the skies or clouds to make it rain." It was much more clever than that, but what I'm trying to point out is the wording "we want." I don't think if I had said "make it rain" with no verbal authority, anything would have happened. Anyway, we're chanting this stupid rain chant in unison. It was 2 lines long, more than just a few words. We were bouncing on the trampoline and feeding off of each other's hyper energy. We did this till we got tired. Then we sat down on the trampoline and caught our breath and laughed. It started raining 5 minutes later. It started light, then got heavier. It wasn't a downpour, but it was certainly raining. So much so that we went inside. My mom, who'd been in the basement, said, "Was this supposed to rain?" It stopped shortly after. I talked about this with my aunt a couple days ago, and she said the fact that we were all family, aka shared the same blood, could have been an impact. I don't know for sure if we made it rain, but it rained. Next story. Not spooky, but whatever. I passed out once in class. I was under so much stress, I think my body shut itself down just to recalibrate. It was the first time I'd ever passed out, and anyways, I remember passing out and I woke up. It literally felt like someone took my headset off and I was now in actual reality. I remember looking around and seeing my family surrounding me. All of them. We have a big family. My grandma and her sisters were at the forefront. "Come on, let's go," they said. I remember feeling so relieved that the hell I had left behind me didn't matter in any capacity anymore. It's the most relaxed I'd ever felt and probably will ever feel. So I went with my family and we lived like normal. No stress or anything bad. It was literal perfection. Everything was in color, like our version of reality, but it was dark. The best way I can explain is living life on Apple's dark mode. We were fine for 5 years, and it did feel that long, until I was back in my spot and had woken up when I first saw my family. When I realized where I was, that 5 years felt like seconds. They told me, "It's time to go back now. You gotta go back." I remember screaming that I wanted to stay. I've never felt so full of despair as when I realized that I was going back. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a blinding light, and that's when I realized everything around me had been dark. Then it sucked me in, and I actually woke up, regained consciousness. I felt sick realizing I was back. Anyway, I don't know what happened. I just thought it was interesting. Also, I was only passed out for maybe 10 seconds, and none of my family members I saw were passed. I have no words for that. That is so scary. All of those stories are so, like, scary, but the first one where the grandpa saw the family member is heart-wrenching. Oh my gosh. But I agree. I'm glad that she found peace. Anyways, that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for coming and listening to some stories with me, and I will see you guys tomorrow.